All right, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to the Office of Congressman Darrell Issa's NASA Mars Rover information session. We are excited that you all are here to join us and our wonderful speaker, Mr. Matthew Wallace from NASA, and we're excited to learn a lot. And with that, I think we'll start with a message from the Congressman.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Congressman Darrell Issa, and I want to thank you for joining us today in this informational webinar. This is the third in a series of webinars we've done this year, and we're pleased to bring experts who can answer directly to you about their area of expertise. Our first session reviewed the Department of Education's Student Aid Program. Our second session focused on the Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Program. Today's session, I'm very excited about because we're going to get an update on the latest news from NASA and the Mars Rover Mission. As you know from recent news coverage, NASA has made exciting advancements that we will be hearing about today and for days, weeks, months, and years to come. Beyond just the mission NASA worked on to provide critical knowledge on weather, atmosphere, geography, and so much more. Today we will hear the latest news from NASA Project Manager Matt Wallace. He works on the Mars 2020 program and in fact is the foremost authority from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory on so much of what's going on and will go on in the future. I'm very excited to hear, and I know you are too. After Mr. Wallace's presentation, we will open the floor for questions. I want to thank you all for joining us today and hope you will join us in future webinars on topics of interest. So please make sure you've signed up to receive our e-newsletter and follow us on social media for future notices. Our website is www.isa.house.gov. Okay, without further ado, I want to present Mr. Wallace for this webinar today. Please take it over.
Thank you very much, Congressman. It's a real pleasure to be here. Hopefully you can all hear me, and if we could get the presentation material up. I'm going to take you through some of the latest activities on the Mars program side of things here at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and try to leave some time for your questions here at the end. So let's go ahead and go to the next chart, please. As the Congressman mentioned, I am the project manager for the Perseverance mission, but I have actually worked on all of the Mars rover missions through my career, starting with the small little one in front, which is the 1996 Mars Pathfinder Sojourner rover. Over the years and decades, we have gotten, our rovers have gotten bigger and more capable. And if we go to the next chart, you'll see representation of the vehicle that we're here to talk about today, which really eclipses all those previous missions, the Perseverance Rover. This is a mission that weighs in at about 1 metric ton. We're carrying about 50% more science and technology payload than the previous large rover, Curiosity. We really have an unprecedented set of very sophisticated and eloquent science instruments to do our job on the surface of Mars. And that job, in fact, its primary mission is to collect samples from another planet, from Mars, to bring back to the Earth to better understand the history of Mars. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this was the first leg in a historic sample return campaign that's never been done before from another planet. In addition to that, we've got a lot of new onboard AI and surface autonomy capabilities. Just in the last week, we actually generated some oxygen as part of a technology experiment from the Martian atmosphere, and I'll say a few more words about that. We've got a new landing hazard avoidance capability, which is something that we use both on Perseverance and we'll use on future missions, both robotic and human exploration missions. And again, I'll say a few more words about that too. And we're also carrying a little helicopter drone called Ingenuity. which perhaps you've seen in the news over the last couple of weeks. This is the first powered aircraft ever to be flown on another planet. And that experiment's going very well, and it's pretty exciting. So I have some new information on that. One of the other things we're also doing is, for the first time ever, we've got microphones. So we're actually bringing that human sense of hearing to another planet for the first time also. So this is just a mission that's loaded with important science capabilities as well as feed-forward technologies. So if we go to the next chart, Perseverance is, sorry, let's see if we can advance to the next one. Okay, do I still have you? There we go, thank you. Perseverance is really part of a string of missions that NASA has been sending to Mars over the last couple of decades. You can see along the top a number of orbiters, and then down on the ground, a set of different surface missions, including some of the rovers, which I mentioned before. Now, we just landed in 2020. I'll also mention that the Chinese have a mission in orbit right now called Tianwen. They're getting ready to release a surface platform that includes a small rover to go down to the surface in the month of May. So keep an eye on the news. You should hear something about that mission as well. The Europeans have a rover coming along called Rosalind Franklin, which will launch in 2022. And of course, NASA will be sending a set of new missions to Mars to pick up these samples, which Perseverance is collecting. And that whole campaign is called the Mars Sample Return. So if we go to the next chart, please. You might wonder, what is all the interest in Mars? You know, why are there so many different countries and so many different organizations that want to get to Mars? And this is why, what you're seeing in front of you here. Right now, Mars is a pretty dry and arid, whoops, go back one, please. Thanks. It looks like this. It looks like this on Mars right now, pretty dry, pretty arid, a little bit like Arizona. But billions of years ago, if you go ahead and run this clip, please, Mars was very different. There was a lot of surface liquid water. The surface was warm. There was a thick atmosphere like we have here on the Earth. The core of the planet was in fact still active, which meant that there was a magnetic field around the planet to protect it from harmful radiation. And so billions of years ago, Mars truly looked just the same way the Earth did at the time when life was forming here on our own planet. And so the fundamental question that's on the table here is, did life evolve on Mars 3 billion years ago when it was evolving here on the Earth? And we know from our previous missions, as I said, that the surface was wet, that it was warm. We know that the planet was habitable in the sense that all this water you're looking at was at a kind of a neutral pH, and that there was fuel for that life. And so really the way to answer that question, the best way to answer that question, is to collect samples on Mars and to bring them back to the Earth so that we can focus the full power of the terrestrial science capability onto these samples to look for these very faint trace chemical signatures, biosignatures we call them, from billions of years ago. And that fundamentally is why Mars is so interesting to us scientifically. Of course, exploration is part of what we do, and human exploration is also part of the agency's objectives, which is why we're carrying a number of these technologies, including the helicopter, this hazard avoidance capability, this ability to make oxygen on the surface of Mars. All of those feed into the human exploration aspect of the Mars program. So let's go to the next chart, please. So where are we going? Where did Perseverance go? Perseverance went to a place called Jezero Crater. You can see it here. It, in fact, billions of years ago was a lake. This whole crater was full of water, and it had an inlet channel where the water would flow in on the left-hand side of the picture, and an outlet channel on the right-hand side. And so a number of interesting rocks and sediments and things came from around the area around Jezero Crater. So it's kind of a place where we were going to go to find a whole treasure trove, we hope, of material, both of material that formed as part of this lake, as well as these influx and outflux events as part of the water history of this particular area, the Jezero Crater. Now, Jezero Crater has been a fascinating place and a place that we wanted to go for a long, long time. And every mission we looked at it, in every mission we had to reject it as a landing site because it was just too dangerous. There are all of the things that make it interesting for scientists, like cliffs and rock fields and sand dunes and things like that, make it a very challenging and dangerous place to land a spacecraft. The thing that changed on Perseverance is that hazard avoidance capability, which I mentioned before. We call it terrain relative navigation, and it has the ability to move us away from hazards during that terminal descent period. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the whole landing went and how it all works, and I'll give you a better feel for what I'm talking about. If you go to the next chart, please. This is actually the full Mars 2020 spacecraft. You can see the rover, which is folded up in its launch stowed condition. You can see some of the wheels looking at you. And then right above the rover is something we call the descent stage. The descent stage is the part of the spacecraft that in fact lowers the rover down onto the surface of Mars during the terminal descent. It's got a bunch of big main engines and a radar to help us understand how close we are to the ground and how fast we're moving, and a number of other capabilities on that descent stage. And you'll get a chance to see it. Both of those things are compressed inside our entry capsule. Our entry capsule is split into two pieces here. On the bottom, there's the entry heat shield, and on the top, it's what we call the back shell, and together they form an entry capsule, much like an Apollo entry capsule that you've seen. And then along the top, we have something called a cruise stage, which has power and propulsion and navigation equipment that helps us get from Earth to Mars. That cruise stage is jettisoned as we enter the Martian atmosphere. Let's go to the next page. And again, just to give you a quick overview, this is what it looks like. The entry capsule comes in at about 13,000 miles an hour. It slows down to about 1,000 miles an hour, which is the speed of about Mach 2 on Mars, and we deploy an enormous parachute supersonically. It's a 70-foot parachute, and I'll show you some more pictures of that. That slows us down to about 200 miles an hour. And then the descent stage drops out of that back shell with the rover, and on the right-hand side, you can see the rover descending on the bottom of a tether being placed on the surface by the descent stage. And that's how the entry, descent, and landing activities work. I want to mention also that all of this has to happen autonomously. The light time, the amount of time it takes to send a command to the vehicle, is about 10 minutes from the Earth. And it takes only about 10 minutes to go from that upper left picture down to the ground. And so we don't have time to joystick it. All of this essentially has to happen in a controlled disassembly of the spacecraft over the course of just a handful of minutes. We call this the 7 minutes of terror. And for the first time ever, we were able to put some ruggedized commercial cameras, kind of like the sport cameras that you might buy for your kids or you might wear when you're out mountain biking or whatever. We took some of those cameras, we put them on the spacecraft, and we captured some pretty stunning footage of this whole event. And so this next video that you're going to see will take you through the landing on February 18th, if we go ahead and advance to the next chart. And hopefully the sound will work and you'll hear the team landing Perseverance on the surface of Mars.
Propulsion, go. EDL phase lead, go.
We have deemed Perseverance ready to execute entry, descent, and landing on her own.
Confirmation of entry interface. Perseverance is currently going 5.3 kilometers per second, about 120 kilometers from the surface of Mars. It will start controlling its path to the landing target. Parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration. The heat shield has been separated. Perseverance now has radar lock on the ground. The back shell has separated. Skycam maneuver has started, about 20 meters off the surface.
Tango Delta, nominal.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.
All right. Thank you. I have to say that landing is always a very emotional event for all of us. You know, we work on these missions for almost a decade and we pour our heart and soul into it. And it's such a dangerous event. You know, only about half the missions that get sent to Mars have actually succeeded historically. And the systems are so complex that you never quite know what Mars is going to throw at you. And so when you get a successful landing like that, it's pretty exciting for the team and exciting for everybody that watched along. And I love that video because of all the kids. The kids really make that video pretty special and spectacular. If you go ahead and advance to the next chart, please. This is a still from one of those cameras I mentioned. This is looking down from our descent stage at the flight vehicle, at Perseverance, just as it's about to touch down at Jezero Crater. And you can see the dust getting moved and kicked around underneath Perseverance by the big engines, which are impacting the surface with the jets. And this image is just pretty spectacular and historic. As I said, the first time we've ever seen a spacecraft land on another planet. So important image for us. And let's go to the next one. This is a picture actually from one of those orbiters looking down at Jezero Crater. You can kind of see the outline of Jezero there. The delta, the base of the delta of that inflow area off to the left. You can see that inflow channel. And what this is taking a picture of is the entry capsule underneath that big supersonic parachute after it's deployed. So this was taken from orbit by one of the orbiters. Another spectacular picture. Go ahead to the next one, please. You know, as I said, it's a big day, and not just for us, but for a lot of folks. And I think, you know, because we were coming out of such a difficult time with the pandemic, this was a mission that really got a lot of attention and a lot of positive feedback from the public. You know, you can see the numbers here, estimated to have reached almost 12 billion people, hit the front pages of 157 newspapers. That landing video tallied up, I think it's up to about 20 million YouTube views now. Our Twitter account, you can see up at the right hand, corner exploded. And, you know, really, I want to emphasize also just how much, you know, just how much attention and I think inspiration our students get. You know, it's really a source of interest across the country for the academic institutions. There were a lot of watch parties, and we get a lot of positive feedback from the organizations that are promoting STEM in particular. So all around, it was a great day on February 18th. Go ahead. Oh, we even got a Mars donut, I should mention, down in that lower right hand. Krispy Kreme made us a Mars donut, which was great. You saw some of these in the video. New York lighting up the Empire State Building, Times Square, excuse me, Times Square, Eiffel Tower at Paris, you know, London. Go ahead to the next one. Even in Los Angeles, on the next chart, please. Thanks. Oops, yeah, it's not advancing for me. There we go. Town hall in Los Angeles, and you know, LAX lit up the pylons there. I have to say, I haven't spent much time in LAX, and I'm kind of, strangely enough, missing it after all this COVID. So go ahead to the next chart. Even the Matterhorn gave us a nod. So that was pretty cool. Go ahead. A lot of interest from world leaders. I have to say, my favorite on the right was when the Queen of England asked for a briefing from one of our British science team members. Palace released this Instagram event, you know, video, which is kind of adorable if you get a chance to watch it, the Queen asking questions about Mars. But you know, attracted a lot of attention around the world. Go ahead to the next one. This is kind of a perspective view, again, of that Jezero crater, the stars where we landed. Just wanted to point out a couple things here. You can see that in the base of that inflow area, the delta. Off to the left is a feature called Kodiak, and I'm going to show you a close-up picture of that. It's a remnant of that delta, that water event. The inflow channel you can see at the top, as well as elements of the crater wall. Go ahead to the next picture, please. And here's a picture from Perseverance, from the rover, looking at Kodiak. And this is a pretty spectacular image for geologists in particular. You can see the soft sand underneath it with that hard capstone on top. The size of some of these rocks in front of it really kind of surprised our science team. It's indicative of some pretty catastrophic flooding events in this area over time. And so that's an area of exploration and investigation that we'll be wanting to do in the future. And behind Kodiak is actually the crater wall of Jezero. So go ahead to the next picture, please. This is what we call a selfie. This is a picture we took of ourselves. We actually stick our arm out in front of the vehicle and then look back with the camera on the end of the robot arm. And this is the picture we got of the rover at Jezero crater. And if you look to the left of the rover, you see one of our friends in the background. That's the Ingenuity helicopter. And I'm going to talk about that. It's sitting right there where we dropped it off. It came to Mars with us, nestled under the belly of the vehicle. And we deployed it about three and a half weeks ago. And we've been conducting aerial flights of Ingenuity. So go ahead to the next one, please. Here's a close-up of it on the surface of Mars. You can see it's a twin counter-rotating rotors. It looks a lot like a drone you might see here on the Earth. The whole thing only weighs about 4 pounds, just to give you a sense of how light it is. And the big challenge for helicopter operations on Mars is that the Martian atmosphere is only about 1% as thick as it is here on the Earth. And so to get the lift, you need really big blades, and you need to spin them very, very fast. And the whole helicopter has to be very light as well. And so it's a real challenge to build something like that, first of all. and then to control it in the Martian environment. If we go to the next one, I think what we have here is should be a video, I believe. Let's go ahead and see if we can run the video. Here we go. The helicopter is in the lower left corner. This is the last flight we did. We completed this just on Sunday. You can see the helicopter lifting up to about 15, 16 feet, and then it's going to fly off to the right and fly out of the field of view. It's flying about 150 meters, about 150 feet off to the north, which is to the right in this image. And we don't have a wide enough field of view on our camera to actually see the entire flight. But we have telemetry and we have some other imagery to know it flew all the way out to its target. And then it was supposed to fly back. And hopefully we're going to see it come back here in just a second and land. There it is. And land right where it took off. Now, this is a helicopter that's made of primarily commercial components, very lightweight cell phone type technology, hardware, which is difficult to design for in the Martian environment. But it's been very successful. We're going to keep flying this for a while, and then we'll move on and start our science operations. But we're getting ready for another flight in tomorrow morning. So we'll be flying about 130 meters, about 3 times farther than the last flight. And this time we'll be flying off to the left, down to the south, where the rover will eventually be going to start looking around and doing some science. If you go to the next chart, please. This is a picture that the helicopter actually took. That little piece on the left up there is one of the helicopter landing legs, actually. But if you go to the next chart, I think what you will see is up in the top left corner over there is Perseverance itself, making a bombing the image here. So this is the first time we've actually had a picture of a rover from another surface platform in over 20 years since Pathfinder mission. So it's pretty exciting for us that it's not super good resolution at this point, but hopefully we'll get some more pictures from the helicopter of the rover and vice versa. Let's go ahead. I'll just mention quickly that as we get out of the helicopter operations phase, we're going to move into an activity where we start taking samples. We use this big robot arm. It's a big 7-foot arm out in front of us, and a large rotary percussive drill. It sounds a lot like a jackhammer. It just bangs into rocks primarily and cores those rocks. It then brings that core back to the rover itself, to that thing called a bit carousel. We transfer the bit with the core in it to the inside of the vehicle, and then we extract that core and we seal it in a tube. And we'll carry those tubes on the vehicle until we have enough of them that we feel like we have a collections worthy of bringing back to the Earth, and we'll put those down in what we call a cache or a depot on the ground, and the next mission will come along and pick up those samples. And that's, as I said, the first leg, really a historic and transformative set of science experiments called sample return. Go ahead to the next view graph. It takes a lot of people to do a mission like this. This is just a picture of part of the team at the Jet Propulsion Lab north of where most of you all are, up in Pasadena. And really at JPL, I would say almost a third of the people at the laboratory, more than 2,000 people in one way or another, worked on this mission in some fashion. Our science team is large and international, over 400 scientists. We don't do these things by ourselves. We engage the aerospace and in some cases the military, commercial industry and defense industry. And so spread across, I think, 44 different states and 560 cities, as you can see here. We got help from more than 1,000 contractors across the country. And there's a significant international contribution as well, both on the instruments and on some of the hardware that the rover uses to do its mission. Go ahead to the next one, please. You know, we had to finish this mission and get it to the launch pad after the pandemic arrived. We were down at Kennedy Space Center in March of last year, trying to do our final assembly, processing, and testing for a July launch. And the funny thing about Mars missions is you can only launch to Mars once every 2 years. You have about a 20-day window, and then Mars and Earth are too far apart. And so if we missed the window last year, we would have had to wait at least 2 more years to get this mission off the ground, which would have added a lot of complexity and risk to the mission. So our best option when the pandemic struck was to keep going as best we could. It was an existential moment for me because I really was uncertain whether or not we could get it done. But we got a tremendous amount of help from across the agency, from our contractors. The team really stepped up in a big way. And we got the system assembled, tested, and onto the launch vehicle in time to make the launch window last summer. And one of the things I think we all recognized is that, you know, it's more than just that team I mentioned on the previous page. You know, when you're in a situation like this, we really wanted to pay homage in some way to the first responders, to the medical community, you know, that were out there really, truly risking their lives to keep us all safe. And so we added this plaque at the last moment, just before we buttoned up the vehicle inside the entry vehicle, inside the entry capsule. You can see we've got a representation of the globe and all of us facing this pandemic together, the spacecraft leaving the Earth, heading to Mars, and of course the familiar staff and serpent of the medical community there. And that is now on Mars at Jezero Crater with Perseverance. Go ahead to the next one. This is one other thing. We put a number of things on the vehicle to kind of, you know, mark the mission and to, you know, send along certain messages, I think. And this is a picture from one of those commercial ruggedized cameras I mentioned, one of those sport cameras that we had pointed up at our big supersonic parachute. This is actually the parachute looking up on Mars that was, you know, helped us land the spacecraft. And when this image first came back, I had to do a little bit of a double take because I'm looking at the image and I'm looking at the pattern, the white and the red pattern, and I'm thinking, that's kind of an odd pattern. I don't remember that pattern. And in fact, none of our test parachutes looked like this. It had just kind of a standard repeating pattern on it. And then I remembered that the team asked if they could essentially encode a message in 1s and 0s into the pattern of the parachute. And if you hit advance one more time, you'll see, I think, the message. There it is. If you start on the inside of this parachute, you can see the word dare, and then the next ring out, it says mighty, and then the next ring out says things. Dare mighty things, which is a quote taken from a famous Teddy Roosevelt speech, and one I'm particularly fond of, and it's become kind of a motto at the Jet Propulsion Lab. You know, and so this was encoded into the parachute along with the latitude and longitude around that outer ring of JPL itself up here in Pasadena. Now, we didn't tell people what the code was, and we wondered how long it was going to take them to crack the code. It really only took the internet about 3 hours, I think, to get it. You know, this is you know, this is kind of what the mission's all about, right? This is what the agency's about, Mars exploration's about, going places we haven't been, learning things we don't know, asking questions, and really pushing the boundaries and the frontiers of space. Darren, mighty thanks. You know, that's what we do, and so far this has just been a mission that's really fired on all cylinders and done very well. So that's my last view graph, and thank you all for your attention and for the help with the audio and visual there. I appreciate that, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Those photos, just so incredible. It looks like we have a few questions already submitted, so I can read those to you. And to everyone else who's still thinking of a question, please feel free to enter your questions so that I can read them and we can get some answers. All right, our first question is, how do you know what Mars was like 1 billion years ago?
That's exactly what the mission is designed to do, is to help us understand exactly that. As I said, there's been a series of missions. The first objective was to kind of what we call follow the water. And we took enough instrumentation and imagery to really see the water processes on the surface of Mars. So we knew there was liquid surface water. And that's kind of key ingredient number one to determining whether or not life may have formed on Mars. And then we sent more sophisticated instrumentation on Curiosity. It had analytical laboratory capability, essentially, right? So we would ingest samples into that laboratory, and we would do chemical and mineralogical analysis on those samples and understand from that perspective what the environment looked like. And by taking those samples from rocks that were formed billions of years ago, and we can age date a lot of this hardware, we can get a sense of what Mars was like before it became the planet it is now. And so it's really a combination of the instruments that we take with us to the surface, as well as the imagery and the spectrometry that we do from orbit, from our various orbiting platforms, to understand that you got to piece together that history. One of the images I showed was of Kodiak, that delta remnant, and just like you can go to the Grand Canyon, and you can see the millions and millions of years of layering over time that occurred in the Grand Canyon. You can see that stratigraphy, as they say, in the vertical relief. The scientists and geologists can do the same thing on Mars, which is why we go to places like Jezero, because it has those kinds of features where we can see those kinds of things.
All right, we have our next question, and it says, when do you anticipate NASA may return to collect the samples, and what may that look like? Will you work with other agencies?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what does it look like? It's a couple different missions, actually, that have to happen. And we're trying to launch the first of those missions in 2026. But basically, there's one mission which will go to the surface of Mars with a what we call a fetch rover. And that fetch rover will go out and pick up the samples. That's option one. Option two is if Perseverance is still alive and healthy, it could bring the samples to that lander itself. So we got two different ways of getting the samples to the lander. Once the samples are on the lander will take a robot arm and put the samples into a rocket, basically. And it's a relatively small rocket, and it launches the samples into orbit around Mars. We call that the Mars Ascent Vehicle. And once we get the samples into orbit around Mars, another spacecraft, this is mission number 2, an orbiter comes along. It will rendezvous in orbit around Mars. It'll be the first time we've ever tried to do it. Rendezvous with that sample, pick it up, bring it back to the Earth, release it, and it'll essentially land in a capsule in the desert. And so it's really two key missions that have to happen. And the other part of your question is, will we do this alone or with other agencies? We are doing these missions in collaboration with the European Space Agency. In fact, the orbiter is a European Space Agency-led spacecraft, and the lander is a NASA-led spacecraft. But each of the agencies have components on the other spacecraft, and so it's a highly collaborative program going forward, and tries to play into the strengths that each of the agencies have. So if we launch the spacecraft, and I should finish the story, if we launch the spacecraft in 26-ish time frame, we'll have samples back at the beginning of the 2030s, basically. It takes a while to get there, to get the samples, get them into orbit, rendezvous, and bring them back. So on the order of a decade, we may have samples back from another planet for the first time.
All right, we have, I think, a question we were all thinking. When do you think a manned mission will be able to land on Mars?
It's a great question, and one of the great things about Perseverance is we're carrying so much technology to help feed into that activity, which really makes us, ask ourselves that same question a lot. It's something we all, even those of us that work in robotic exploration, we just can't wait to send a human to to Mars as well. I think the agency is targeting the 2030s for a human mission to Mars. But it's a difficult endeavor. I'm just going to tell you, the rover weighs in, I think I mentioned, at basically 1 metric ton. It's about 1,000 kilograms or about 2,000 pounds, roughly speaking. A human mission to the surface of Mars would require us to land about 40 metric tons or 50 metric tons, a significant 50 times the capability that we have from a landing system perspective for Perseverance. And you got a sense of the complexity and the challenge of landing even robotic systems on Mars. And so it's a big challenge, but there's nothing out of reach for us. It's something we can do. And the agency would like to do that in the 2030s. Most people are fully aware of Apollo and going to the moon, and Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon for the first time. But what a lot of people don't perhaps realize is that there was a series of robotic explorers that were precursor missions that went to the moon. They were actually built at JPL. They were called Ranger and Surveyor. And so I think of Perseverance very much of a human precursor mission to Mars. So it really is, Perseverance really is that first major step, in my opinion, in getting to a point where we can get humans onto the surface of Mars. It's a big challenge, but it's something we're going to do. Some people ask me, are we ever going to go to Mars? And I always say, of course, we're going to go to Mars. It's what we do. We cross oceans, we go over mountains, we do it because they're there, right? We're going to go to Mars. We're going to have a human on Mars. Maybe it'll be my daughter or your grandkids, or, I'm not sure when for sure, but we know it's going to happen, and we need to keep making progress in that direction.
All right. What can chemical and biological analyses of Mars's soil and atmosphere tell us about the future of Earth's evolution with regard to the challenges we're currently facing?
It's a good question, and it's something that that scientists are interested in understanding. Again, as I said before, 3 billion years ago, Mars really did look very, very Earth-like, and then things changed. Things changed, and climate scientists here on the Earth are curious about, why. We still don't have a really good answer, frankly, for that question. We know that, for instance, the core cooled, and so that magnetic field that I talked about started to disappear. And we know that the eccentricity, basically the way in which Mars was traveling around the sun, started to change over the millennia, over time. And we know that had a fundamental effect on the Martian environment as well. But understanding exactly how that atmosphere was stripped away or lost, and exactly what happened to all the water. I mean, we know there's some water trapped on the poles. We know there's some water underground on Mars, which is an important thing to know about for future human exploration. But understanding all those processes that led to, those changes, those global changes on Mars, is something we're still trying to, piece together. And Perseverance is part of many different missions that are trying to do that. So that is part of the equation. That's part of the types of information we're trying to get from our instrumentation, as well as these other missions.
All right, we have another question. Are there any live feeds on Mars that we can currently watch?
I'm sorry, are there any live what?
Live feeds, video feeds.
I don't believe we have any live feeds. When we're assembling the spacecraft and getting ready for launch, we always have a live webcam out there. But the nature of the work right now is periodic. The teams come in for a period of time, they plan the day's activities, they send it up to the rover, and then the teams go home. And so there's not much going on for good fractions of the day inside the mission support areas and things like that. So I don't believe there's any, I cannot think of any live feeds, but there's a lot of social media out there. Perseverance, is active on Instagram and Twitter, as is Ingenuity. And if you go to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or if you simply Google Perseverance and Mars 2020 and JPL and NASA, you're going to see a flood of websites. One of the things we do, if you go to the mission web page, I'll mention this because a lot of people don't know about it. If you go to the mission web page, there's a section called Multimedia, and if you click on that, there's a drop-down set of options for imagery. And so when we get imagery back from Mars, like that imagery I was showing you, we push it immediately to the public. You guys can see it essentially at the same time we're seeing it, if you want to. It's not processed, it's not always perfectly stitched together and all of that, but you can look at Mars basically at the same time we're looking at Mars. And for the first time ever, there's imagery, there's videos, and for the first time ever, we also have an audio channel, which is kind of fun. I didn't add any audio files to the presentation, but if you want to hear what wind sounds like on Mars, or if you want to hear what it sounds like when the wheels are turning over the surface of Mars, or we're running our drill here in the future, you can go to those audio files and listen in. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. We'll do a few more questions. We have one saying, will Perseverance stay forever on Mars? Where will it go if not?
Perseverance is going to be there until one of our descendants goes and picks it up for parts or something, like the Martian. I don't know if you saw The Martian, but Matt Damon went over and found Sojourner, that little rover that I mentioned at the beginning, and I think used some of the communication equipment, things like that. So Perseverance is going to be there, like all of our surface missions. It's going to stay on Mars. It's radioing all its information back, and so it'll stay there until we get there to do something with it and create a little monument maybe out of it someday. But yeah, it'll be there. Its primary mission is we designed it for about 2 years, 2 Earth years, which is equivalent to 1 Mars year. But almost all of our rovers, once they get past that initial sort of risk period, what we call infant mortality, do have a tendency to last much longer. You know, a Spirit and Opportunity, which landed in 2004, had a primary mission lifetime of 3 months, and Opportunity was still going 14 years later. And of course, Curiosity has been on the surface now for 8 years. And so we're hoping that Perseverance is going to be there a long time, yeah, and operational for a long time.
Awesome. Speaking of operations, we have a question asking, is Perseverance completely autonomous, or is there some remote controlling being done?
That's a good question. Yeah, it is almost all autonomous. We have the ability to send commands to it basically in the morning. What happens is the rover will wake up in the morning as the sun starts to come up on Mars, the Martian morning, and things start to get warm and there's light for the cameras and things like that. And our joints are heated up well enough that we can use them. And right about that time, we'll upload a set of instructions. But those instructions are pretty high level. They're kind of like, go here, you know, or do this kind of science. And much of what Perseverance then has to do is use its own intelligence, its own brains, its own autonomy to take those high level instructions and create, you know, and actually go through the set of activities and do the drives and avoid hazards and put the robot arm where it's supposed to go and things like that. And so, so that happens, that upload of commands and what we call sequences happens in the morning. The vehicle will operate through the Martian day. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's quitting time, you know, for Perseverance. And she'll send all of her data back to the Earth. Normally the data goes up through an orbiter and then from an orbiter back to the Earth. And Perseverance will go to sleep and conserve its energy until the next morning. We'll occasionally wake up to do science or something like that on nighttime activity. But that's kind of how the cycle works. And so it is a combination of planning here on the ground and a lot of autonomy, a lot of capability of the vehicle on the surface to do its own job.
We have a couple questions that revolve around the CO2 to oxygen conversion process. How does the oxygen generator work? And will you be able to generate oxygen for a Mars station?
Yeah, that's I'm glad you asked the question because I didn't talk too much about it. We are carrying this experiment. It's called MOXIE. And what it does is it ingests the Martian atmosphere, the CO2, as you mentioned, carbon dioxide, and it heats it, it passes, it compresses it, and then it passes it across a ceramic, essentially, and very hot ceramic. The ceramic is 800 degrees C, on the order of 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that ceramic essentially uses a process called electrolysis to separate out the carbon monoxide from oxygen, O2, and it will produce oxygen at a relatively low rate, you know, maybe 10, 12 grams per hour, and but it'll produce very pure oxygen, like 99% pure oxygen. And this experiment, this payload, this MOXIE experiment, is really a scaled down version of what we will need for human exploration. It's probably about 1/100th the scale of what we would actually use to produce oxygen for a human exploration mission. We actually need oxygen for 2 reasons. One, obviously, for life support, for astronauts to breathe. It turns out that's not the most significant need for oxygen on a human exploration mission. What oxygen is primarily needed for is for fuel to get humans from Mars back to the Earth, and so that oxygen serves as an oxidizer. And so far, we've run this experiment once, and it worked exactly as designed. The numbers that came out were right on top of our model predictions as far as oxygen generation rates and purities and other things. And we'll do another 10 or 12 experiments like that to prove out this technology, this ability to essentially make oxygen from in situ resources. But it is a scaled version of the technology that would be used in the future.
I think we've got time for one more. There are still questions coming in, so we can send these to you for everyone who's curious.
Sure.
But how have you improved the design of Perseverance to survive the sometimes extreme conditions on the surface of Mars, as well as the thinness of the atmosphere?
Yeah, you know, every rover that we have flown, we've learned things, and so every time we put a mission together, we're able to improve some aspect of the engineering or the science on it. Perseverance leveraged a lot of the work and designs that we did on Curiosity to help us get to the surface. But then it did improve in a number of different areas from the last mission. I'll give you at least one example, which is that the wheels. If you were to go to Mars and look at the Curiosity wheels, the mission that landed in 2012 at a place called Gale Crater, you would see a bunch of holes in the treads of the wheels. And that's because there were rock fields at that landing site that we had never seen before. These really kind of nasty looking rocks that sort of, they almost worked like can openers. They were puncturing holes into our wheels. And so we learned to recognize those rocks and to stay away from them and to change the way we drove that vehicle. And so we took those things that we learned, we modified the wheel design on Perseverance. We beefed it up. We got rid of some of the what we call stress points, some of the weaknesses in the wheel tread. And it's a very robust wheel design, but we also have the ability to recognize the types of hazards that cause those kinds of problems. So that's just one example of an improvement that we made. Perseverance is also able to drive a lot faster, since talking about driving. It has an extra brain that we put in it to process imagery and to look for hazards more quickly than the last rover. And so instead of driving maybe 60 meters in an hour or so, Perseverance has the ability to drive close to 200 meters in an hour, which is for as Mars rovers goes, that's pretty fast. So those are the kinds of improvements that we make. We're always trying to learn how to inoculate ourselves against that Martian environment. The atmosphere is pretty thin. That's not a big problem for the rover, but one of the problems that we face constantly is the dust on Mars. It's very, very fine. It's kind of like talcum powder, and it tends to get into our mechanisms. It gets into our motors and our gearboxes, and so we're always trying to improve the seals, for instance, that we have on those mechanisms. There's a host of other ways, but yeah, it's a good question and something we try to do on every mission.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and thank you to our wonderful panelist, Mr. Wallace, for helping us understand NASA a bit better. I can't say we're all going to fully understand the way you do, but you brought new light to these great findings and taught us a lot about the Mars rover today. We hope that this information session was helpful and that you all were able to get some of your questions answered. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to our Washington, D.C. office or our California office, and we're happy to assist with any follow-up. Our next webinar, we will have another one in May. We're still working on that date, but once that date is announced, you'll be able to register at http://isa.house.gov. We would love to have you there, so please join us and share with anybody else who might be interested. Again, I will thank you all again, and I hope you found this information session helpful, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you. Appreciate it.